Hi, this is EU Geology Earth News. This is Kingman, Arizona. It's I-40, takes you to LA. I drove by here 6 years ago and saw this formation right up here, and it just really got my attention. I was driving by, didn't get a good view, it was hard to see. I came back, and the photograph you're about to see, I'm standing down here by H&H Trailer looking northwest at this road cut here, and just looks bizarre. So this is the Kingman road cut. This is basalt, and I asked the geologist, and he said that it flowed here from Peach Springs to the east. I'll show you a map shortly of Peach Springs, but let's look at this. He said this was volcanic dust, and when I drove by originally I thought it was rock, but it's not very well consolidated. It's more like dust or dirt, and supposedly it's from a volcano, and it's tough but not welded tough. And you can see the layers. You can see a fault here where there was a landslide where this would hook up with, I think it's this one down here. So this shifted in places. There's a lot of little landslides. This is a pretty big one. I have a close-up. We'll look at that later. But all this basalt with this columnar hexagon pattern on the outside, and then you can see where they scraped it away for the road, that it's not this dark brown color and hexagon in the center. And it's funny because the hexagons supposedly are from slow cooling on the inside, but here it really seems like the outside has the hexagons, which would have cooled much faster. So that kind of goes against, I think, the general explanation of the hexagon pattern. And then there's this other really interesting part. There's the basalt up here. So if that's a flow, where's the rest of the basalt that this connects to? Does this have to go back 50 miles to the east to Peach Springs? That doesn't make any sense. How you could get an additional flow up here, where I see this as the water line. And what's above the water line is getting coated with red hot dust that's coming from the sky, not from a volcano 40 or 50 miles to the east. Now we're going to look at a map and see where this has to come from. Well, here we go. Here's Kingman down here, and here's old Route 66. Comes right along here, swings over. This is a really big ridge. Swings around and up. And right here, a town that's too small to even be shown, is Peach Springs. They have a road that takes you down here and connects to the Colorado River, which is interesting. You get to see the Vishnu schist and the granite at the base of it. But it's $25 per person to drive down this really bad road. Doesn't seem like much of a bargain. But anyway, this is Peach Springs, and this is where the volcano used to be, according to most geologists. So the volcano was somewhere around here. It's not there anymore. There is some basalt on these formations at the very top. So supposedly the basalt had to flow, one gigantic sheet of basalt going downhill, always downhill. It's not a pyroclastic flow. It's a basalt flow that's going to follow the rules of gravity. And it's going to have to go over this and all of this and flow across this valley, which is down deep. And then, after it's flowed all this way, just as smooth as can be, it has to get up to these formations down here. And some of them go up quite high. All of this, you can see the flat stuff, is basalt. And it goes all the way up to here. And this is very high. So it had to flow downhill from Peach Springs all the way across this gigantic valley, cover this area, and cover all of this, and then it had to evaporate. It didn't just kind of go away, go downhill, go downstream in the valley. You can't find any trace of it. You can't find any trace of the volcano. And every time I go to BLM, it's funny because, well, it's There's geologists out at Peach Springs today looking for the volcano, but they can't find it. But they know it had to be there because we have basalt here. And there's, of course, no other explanation for basalt except a volcanic explanation coming from either a volcanic cone, volcano, or possibly a cinder cone. So they're so desperate that we have Kingman up here again, I-40. So they say, well, we can't find it at Peach Springs. Maybe it came from Oatman. So you can come over here. There's a town up here called Oatman. And they say, well, it doesn't look like a volcano. There's some melted stuff at the very top. It looks like it's welded tough from a wind from the south. But it must have flowed over this ridge, because this ridge is really high, and then flowed across this entire valley, downhill, so it had to start real high, and then it covered all of these areas over here. And then guess what? All of this basalt evaporated also. And you don't really see a volcano over here. So they have a big problem. And the basalt that's remaining, that's above I-40, is pristine. It looks like it was deposited yesterday, where those hexagon patterns are. It doesn't look to have experienced one iota of erosion. That's a serious problem. You'd think there'd be some erosion of all this other stuff, either here or there. And you'll never guess what. This is every place. Everywhere you go, there's basalt up on the tops of formations, and it's real flat. And basalt doesn't flow flat. It flows ropey, chunky, blocky. You can go to basalt flows, and they're not at all flat. They're very distinctly broken up. And the basalt that we do find is amazingly flat. This is the formation in Kingman again. The trucks help you to have some sort of a scale. This is the basalt that looks like it was deposited yesterday. It looks like this is the way it looked right after it happened. Not a bit of erosion, but yet you have mile after mile after mile of basalt that had to disappear completely, not just a little. Here are the faults that I was talking about earlier. This one actually lines up with this one. You can see the dark red, dark red. This used to be up there. There was a slippage. This seems to have come down, or that went up. This probably came down. This lines up with this. All the way up you can see these breaks. During these events, there were earthquakes that were worldwide, according to Worlds in Collision, Dr. Velikovsky, and the eyewitnesses who survived this. Every building was destroyed. Nothing was left. And then it was covered with possibly mile after mile of fresh material, so that we don't get to see what was there prior to this. What we see are buildings created after the main catastrophe. We're seeing new stuff. It starts off primitive, Neolithic, and gets more modern very quickly because they're rediscovering their past. So the question is, did this basalt flow here from Peach Springs or Oatman? Or did it come in as red-hot dust as described by the survivors? This is part of the area where people saw red-hot rocks mingled with a river of fire. Geologists would never ever consider that. And then again, how are you going to get a flow of basalt making a wedding cake pattern like that? Why is that basalt up there covering this? How does that work with a flow? Where if there's a flood and you get a new water level, then anything sticking up above the flood is going to get covered with fresh basalt. While anything below the flood, the red hot dust falls into the water and goes downstream, washed away, cooled off. It's no longer molten. So it's such a simpler explanation than disappearing volcanoes and disappearing basalt flows, and then basalt that's flat that doesn't look like it flowed. Thank you.